The Spanish Civil War started on July 17, 1936 and ended on April 1, 1939. It started when Emilio Mola and Francisco Franco launched an uprising aimed at overthrowing the country's democratically elected republic. The civil war in Spain was between nationalists and republicans. Francisco Franco was the leader of the nationalist forces. The Republican government was headed by the socialist leader Francisco Largo Caballero. The war was won by the nationalist forces who overthrew the Spanish Democratic Republic.
But who was the leader of the nationalist forces, Francisco Franco? Francisco Franco was a general and a dictator who ruled over Spain from 1939 until his death. He was a conservative and a monarchist, fused with the Falange, the Spanish fascist party. He ruled himself to power due to the last leader being executed. Franco was a man of force, a man of faith, and a man of destiny. He thought of himself as chief of Spain by the grace of God. He prayed for hours before making any decisions. Like 4 generations and his elder brother before him, Franco was originally destined for a career as a naval officer, but reduction of admissions to the Naval Academy forced himself to choose the army. Franco was enrolled into the military academy at 14. He was really, quote-unquote, small and frail. He graduated as a second lieutenant 3 years later. He dreamed of glory as a soldier of Spain. Franco soon became the youngest general in all of Europe at 32. He came and stayed in power. His childhood wasn't the happiest. His mother was rather dominant and father more of an in and about person. He was also abusive. So why did Franco become a soldier and a dictator? With his country torn between left and right, Franco devoted his life to a deeply conservative vision of Spain. He was trained in a colonial warfare and was prepared to fight for the vision with deadly force. He joined a military coup to fight ruthlessly in the Spanish Civil War and emerge as the dictator of Spain.
The nationalists won the war, which ended early in 1939 after capturing Madrid, and ruled Spain until Franco's death in November 1975. There are actually many reasons why the nationalists won the war, but one of the main reasons was their good war strategy. They took control over the rich areas quickly, and that meant that the nationalists had about 2 times as much wheat than the Republicans, and by that kept their soldiers well fed and energized, while the Republican soldiers were starving. They also kept the nationalist people happy by having a normal life for the local citizens and avoided any potential enemies. On the other hand, the Republicans had the courage and motivation necessary to win the war, but they had no strategy, losing communist-supported tanks quickly.
So, what countries supported who during the war? The nationalists were supported by fascist states like Mussolini's Italy, Nazi Germany, and Portugal. Italy and Germany sent army, weapons, and air force units to support Franco's forces, and Portugal contributed money. The Republicans were supported by the Soviet Union, left across Europe, and the US. The Soviet Union sent more than 2,000 personnel and $81 million in financial aid. The armory, mainly tank crews and pilots, who actively participated in the combat for the Republicans. Although the US government stayed neutral in the Spanish Civil War, about 2,800 Americans, many of whom had never before fired a gun, volunteered for the Republican cause. The Nationalists and the Republicans both fought for the control of the country. The reason why the Nationalists won in the Civil War can be explained by a number of factors relating to the Nationalist strengths and the Republicans' weaknesses. Ultimately, the Nationalist forces were better skilled, equipped, and organized than the often chaotic Republican factions. Military personnel was one of the strengths of the Nationalists. The Nationalist military commanders were far more experienced than Republican leaders. The Nationalist soldiers were highly skilled. However, the people who fought for the Republican military often were ill-equipped and had no previous military experience. The Nationalists also had a clear leadership. One of the weaknesses of the Republicans was military resources. Supplies sent by the USSR to aid the Republican side were of much lower quality than the aid Germany and Italy sent to the Nationalists. The cost of the aid from the Soviet Union was also important. The Nationalists were to purchase equipment from Germany and Italy using long-term loans. Joseph Stalin, however, demanded immediate payment in gold for any equipment used by the Republicans.
Franco died in Madrid on November 20, 1975, just after midnight of heart failure. After Franco's death, Juan Carlos became king. Under the guiding hand of King Juan Carlos, appointed Franco's successor in 1969, opponents and moderate elements in the regime came together and negotiated a transition from dictatorship to democracy, sealed in the 1978 Constitution. Consensus, after so polarized a past, was very much the watchword between the reformist right and the non-violent left. This was epitomized by the Pact of Forgetting, an unspoken agreement to look ahead and not rake over the past for political reasons. None of the parties had any interest in having the role they played during the Second Republic and the Civil War put under the microscope. The pact was institutionalized by the 1977 Amnesty Law. Spain joined the European Economic Community in 1986 and NATO in 1982 and was a founding member of the Eurozone in 1999, all of which enabled the country to integrate itself into the world at large after a long period of relative isolation.
In many ways, the Spanish Civil War is said to be the first battle of World War II. For example, Hitler used the Spanish Civil War to test new German military equipment and doctrine, and to provide his forces with combat experience for the war he had already planned to launch.
So why wasn't Spain in World War II? Well, at the same time World War II began, Spain was still recovering from the Civil War and couldn't recover fast enough to enter the war. And if they did, his islands in the Atlantic Ocean and Mediterranean Sea would have been threatened. On top of that, the USA was threatening to stop sending Spain oil and wheat.